So just to start with just a kind of a brief outline of what we're talking about this morning, we're going to kind of break this up into 4 different sort of brief sections. So the first thing we want to talk about is just to kind of give you a crash course on just the normal sort of functional anatomy of the shoulder. So we're going to talk about what are the key joints and key muscles. And really what we want to do with this section is kind of give you just a really sort of basic bare bones understanding of what is supposed to happen under normal circumstances. And when we understand that, it'll make the second section much easier to sort of follow when we talk about mechanisms of shoulder injury. So essentially, once we know what is supposed to happen, we can then talk about what are the consequences when that doesn't happen, of course. And as we're talking about this, we're also going to talk about some specific examples of some of the most common sort of shoulder injuries. Now, obviously, there's a fair number of people here, and I'm assuming everyone's here because either they have some type of shoulder problem, know somebody that has shoulder problem, or wants to sort of stay healthy in general. So we'll try to touch on as many sort of issues as we can. If anyone needs more information, or I'm breezing over something, or I'm skipping something altogether that you were hoping I was going to talk about, by all means, shout out a question or raise a hand, and we'll try to get to everything as best as possible. And then last but not least, once we kind of understand what's supposed to happen and the consequences of that not happening, we're going to talk about what are the best treatment and prevention options for everybody. So with that being said, we'll jump right in here, and like I said, if there's any questions, don't hesitate to shout them out, okay? So the first thing, we just need to talk about just basic shoulder kind of anatomy and function. And with this, there's 2 main areas we need to understand. We need to understand the shoulder joint itself, which is called the glenohumeral joint. And then we also need to talk about the scapulothoracic joint, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So first of all, this glenohumeral joint, this is just the actual shoulder joint itself. It's the joint that's formed between the upper part of the arm here, the humerus, and the shoulder blade. Now this is a very interesting joint from an anatomical perspective, and it's a very unique joint. Because what it has is it has what's called a round-on-flat relationship. Right, so we basically have this round head of the humerus that sort of joins or articulates with this relatively flat surface of the shoulder blade itself, or this glenoid fossa. Now this has a couple advantages and a couple of sort of fairly significant disadvantages, at least from an injury perspective. All right, so from a sort of positive thing, from a advantage, it provides us with a ton of mobility. Right, so this joint, if we have a round-on-flat relationship, can move all over the place. All the way up, all the way down, back, across, rotate in any direction, and then any combination of those. And that's really good because essentially that's what allows us to position our arms and our hands in all these different variable positions, which allows us to swing a golf club, throw a baseball, reach up overhead and get a plate out of the cupboard, whatever the case may be. So it's got some good advantages like that. The problem is, with this sort of inherent mobility, we have a sort of a built-in instability or a lack of sort of control in that area. So basically, with this round-on-flat relationship, if this is all we had, this is going to slide all over the place and be really sloppy with movements. Okay, if you contrast that with, say, the hip joint, which is that deep ball and socket joint, there's a lot of inherent bony stability, so it can take a lot of sort of, abuse and motion and pounding. Very different situation in this glenohumeral joint. So that instability is bad. We don't want this thing sliding all over the place when we're reaching, throwing, swinging, whatever the case is. So the body has to rely on a different system to sort of stabilize that. And that system is the muscular system. In particular, it's this rotator cuff. Everyone's at least heard of the rotator cuff, I'm sure. All right, it's a big sort of player. Name comes up all the time when we're talking about sort of shoulder issues. But let's just take a minute so we really understand what this rotator cuff has to do, because this is critical with all shoulder issues. So like the name implies, rotator cuff rotates the shoulder back and forth like this, of course. But more importantly, what it does is it actually compresses the shoulder, or it holds the shoulder, that round head of that humerus, very tight and stable against that flat surface of the glenoid fossa. So if you were to look at sort of and you can kind of see in this picture here, kind of the direction that these muscles go in. So they basically pull in this way, and these lower fibers pull down this way. Right? So it basically compresses, and very importantly, and we'll talk about more on this in detail when we get to the injury mechanisms, as you raise that shoulder overhead, it actually pulls the shoulder down, or pulls this round head of the humerus down, so it depresses the shoulder. That's a critical motion. Okay? So that's a real quick basic version, but that's an important concept. So that makes sense to everybody as far as this compression, and it holds that tight when we're moving, so it sort of slides instead of rotates up. Okay, good. Now, the second thing is the shoulder blade itself. So shoulder blade, of course, officially known as the scapula, this is what connects the arm to the rest of the body. on. So this is an important factor as well, because when we talk about shoulder movement, this shoulder blade actually moves a great deal. So whenever you move the arm up or across, and I have a little video of this in a moment, this shoulder blade actually rotates and slides and moves on the rib cage. So about a third of your motions, for example, if I'm raising the arm up overhead, a third of that comes from the shoulder blade itself, and the other sort of 2/3 will come from the shoulder joint. And sort of the coordination and the synchronicity between the arm and the shoulder blade is really critical with movement. Now again, just like we saw with the glenohumeral joint, with a lot of mobility in through the shoulder joint, with the shoulder blade, we also have this kind of inherent instability in there as well. So it tends to slide and move around a little bit. So again, we have a muscular system. Actually, sorry, this is just that movie I was talking about here. So you can see with these movements how much the shoulder blade would sort of move around and move on the rib cage there. You can see that movement is really important as far as normal blade moves. Okay, so like I said, like the rotator cuff, we have a similar concept or a similar set of muscles with the shoulder blade itself. We call these the scapulothoracic muscles. So the very deepest layer, of course, we have some rhomboids in through here. This is the serratus anterior that attaches on the underneath surface of the shoulder blade and wraps around the front. So these essentially form a force couple, and you can pull back and forth and also kind of rotate back and forth. So they are kind of opposing muscles. It also has this deep levator scapular muscle attaches in through the upper corner of the shoulder blade, goes up into this neck. So that's going to help with sort of elevation and depression of the shoulder blade. And on top of that, this is another big player that we hear all the time, this trapezius muscle. So we have upper, middle, and lower. So basically this forms all these sort of forces. And you can see if you look at just the shoulder blade here, we basically have forces up, down, side to side, and rotate. So we can kind of control that kind of three-dimensional movement of this shoulder blade. Everyone follow me so far? Shoot.
Quick question. What muscle goes from the top of the shoulder blade up the neck? What did you say that was?
This right here?
Yeah.
So this is going to be, that's the levator scapula muscle. Okay, so that's going to touch right on the upper corner, so basically right in through here. This is a problem with a lot of office workers and stuff like that, just a common spot to be sore. So that's a levator. It's going to attach in through basically C1, 2, 3, 4 right on this sort of the TB. So it travels all the way along the neck as well. Okay. And then upper trapezius here, I mean, it's basically, if you kind of superimpose these, right? So this is the most superficial, right under the skin. This is underneath that muscle, so it's kind of layered in there. Yeah.
So that muscle there would be controlling right here? Right there?
These muscles here?
That one there? Is that it right there?
Yeah, so...
That's where my pain's at, that's all.
Yeah. That's where about 90% of people's shoulder pains are right there, and it can be a whole bunch of stuff, which we're going to get into. This muscle, if you were to point to it on your body, so these muscles here are actually more so in through here. Yeah. This muscle is going to go to the upper corner, back in through here, but it's not going to be on the front there. It's a little bit different. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so like I said, that's just the crash course. It's not everything you'll ever need to know in your life, but that's enough for us to get the general understanding. So the key point is these muscles are really important to shoulder movement. Okay.